In the palatial estate of Chief Clement Eudofia, silence often masked secrets too dangerous to utter aloud. Behind the marble floors and ornamental gates, stood an empire built on proceeds from aluminium and enterprising efforts. Chief Clement Eudofia was a successful business mogul in the aluminium industry. Somewhere in that web of fortune and family politics, where greed and jealousy drizzled silent bitterness, a boy named Richard, his grandson, carried an innocent weight of victimization from the people he knew as his own family, without the protection of his late father who until his death, was one of Chief Clement Eudofia's 3 sons, the most prolific and enterprising of them all. The suitcase hit the marble floor with a violent thud that startled a toddler in the hands of its mum, Auntie Rose. "You're no longer welcome here." A Sukwar's voice echoed through the hall like thunder. Richard, stunned with tears of betrayal, looked from his uncle's enraged face to the dozen family members standing like judges around him and looking coldly with the impression that obviously announced no room for mercy. His heart pounded, not in fear, but disbelief. "I didn't steal anything," he said while quietly shaking his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You expect us to stand here and believe that nonsense coming from you? You are too heartless that you don't even have any decency nor regards to any of us here to tell us the truth," snapped Auntie Rose, her arms folded tightly around her crying baby. 1 million naira gone from the safe and only you had access to the office? "I haven't even been to the office in 2 weeks, Richard said helplessly. "Enough!" a Sukwar roared. "Take your lies to the street this minute, I have had enough of you, get out." His cousin Uduak, smirking from the corner, looked away when Richard's eyes met his. It was clear now. Richard knew that the whole setup had already been perfectly laid against him. His father, Daniel Eudofia, was no more to defend him. He had no one. And so, without trial or evidence to base their false accusation upon, Richard was cast out of the house he'd called his home all his life. At just 19, the Eudofia legacy had one in their bloodline, stepped out into the world with nothing but shame. The street and town of Ikotekpene, with its orange-tinted evenings and vibrant roadside culture, welcomed Richard with its share of hardship. At first, he slept behind the abandoned government building near the main market. He avoided the plaza at day, but sneaked around at night for a comfortable place to lay his head. He managed to find a way to enter the town stadium some night to sleep. It was not just the eyes of the gods that kept watch over him, a protective eyes was dedicated over him both night and day. He bathed at the town stream and ate leftovers from a bukka whose owner occasionally felt pity for him. He gradually adjusted to life in the street and stopped hiding from shame and eventually met Elvis, a fast-talking street boy with sharp instincts and a crooked smile. Then he connected with Eni, a quiet, reserved girl who roasted plantains at the T-junction of the beginning of Adadayaga Street every evening. "You be big boy," Elvis said with amusement when Richard helped him carry his load one day. But the street knowed a look face. Richard didn't tell them who he truly was because he knew the will ask questions and he was not ready for where it might lead to. Not because he was ashamed, but because he wasn't sure it mattered anymore. But while Richard struggled to adapt, a silent shadow watched him from a distance. Sergeant Effiong, an ex-military man with eyes like hawks, had been contracted and instructed by Chief Eudofia, his grandfather, to protect Richard at all cost. "Don't interfere unless his life is in danger," the old man had said months earlier. "But make sure no bullet touches his shadow." And so, while Richard slept under flyovers, stadium and wherever he chose to, Effiong watched over him from a distance. Out of wisdom, his grandfather chose not to intervene at the treacherous act of wrongfully accusing and chasing Richard out to the street. He needed Richard to be toughened up with a little orientation of life in the streets. Richard occasionally received cash gifts from strangers while on the street, and the gifts were usually way too generous that got him wondering all the time. And from different people that he had never seen. It was the stretched hands of his grandfather, through different members of his staff. And the second reason was because he feared that they may poison him or end his life in one way or the other, just like they did to his father. Renting an apartment for him was out of the question, because his uncles may find out and hurt him and Richard may remain too comfortable without getting the toughness and lessons from the street. In the Udofia mansion, death had entered quietly and unfortunately expectedly to some member of the family who couldn't wait to inherit Grandpa's wealth. Chief Udofia, now weak with illness, barely left his room. But his mind was alert and aware of all that was happening within the family circle and his business empire. He knew his end was near. Asukwar and Friday, his two remaining sons, were circling like vultures, pretending to care so much but praying so hard for the end to come. Their voices were laced with pretend concern, their offers to take over the company laughably transparent for anyone to see the eagerness to get him out of the way. "I know what you did to Daniel," the old man whispered one night to Asukwar, coughing into his silk pillow. "You and Friday, but I have been quiet and remained with a broken heart. You poisoned the roots of this family." Asukwar turned pale and speechless, realizing that what they did was not a secret after all. Discovering that Chief Udofia had known all along but remained quiet, even got him scared and wondering what he's got in his mind. He excused himself and went straight to Friday, his brother. But Friday was tipsy with drinks and paid him little or no attention. Their greed even scares Chief Udofia and he sometimes fears that they may decide to fast-track his death. Sensing how close his end might have come, the old man summoned Barrister Uffert, his longtime lawyer, and signed a new will with very strict instruction to the lawyer after a long sensitive discussion. The terms were clear. 80% of my estate, companies, and assets go to my grandson, Richard Ekong Udofia. The remainder is to be shared between my sons. If Richard is not found within 90 days of my death, the court must investigate foul play, with his two sons as prime suspects. 2 days later, Chief Udofia died peacefully in his sleep. The Udofia mansion was crowded with sympathizers who came to condole with the family. The burial commanded a state funeral which emphasized his importance and influence. After his burial, the expected gathering took place at the family mansion. And then they proceeded to the court as was directed by the family lawyer, Barrister Uffert. Family members, lawyers, even reporters and more were in attendance. Everyone wanted to hear the final command of the billionaire, late Chief Clement Udofia. All was seated with absolute silence and the two sons of late Chief Clement Udofia, Friday and Asukwar, struggled to mask their joyful expectation with a solemn mourning appearances. A handful of policemen were also there to make sure that the revelation went peacefully. Barrister Uffert stood in front of the room, his face unreadable. As per the will of the late Chief Clement Udofia, gasps filled the room as he read the lines. Richard Ekong Udofia, the supposedly disgraced thief, had inherited nearly the entire empire. Asukwar shouted. "That boy is a criminal. And he's missing. This is nonsense." But the judge present in the room slammed her hand on the table. This will was filed legally and with serious conditions attached to it. And with regards, Asukwar Udofia and Friday Udofia must remain closely monitored until Richard is found. The court hereby orders a national search for Richard Udofia. If he is not found within 90 days, an inquest into his disappearance will be launched, with Asukwar Udofia and Friday Udofia as prime suspects. And should foul play be discovered, she paused, letting the silence weigh, those responsible will face justice. The room was dead quiet. Days later on the street of Ikotekpene, Richard was helping Eni to bandage a cut on her hand when Elvis came running. "Guy! Your face is on the cover of the newspaper." Richard blinked but continued with what he was doing. "Look, I am serious. Your picture is on the back cover of the newspaper. I was trying to peek on sports news and I saw your picture." "What are you talking about?" Richard asked as he finished with the bandage. Elvis dragged him as they ran to the man who was reading through the newspaper and showed him. Even the man saw him and picked interest. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's grandson missing, court orders search for Richard Udofia." Richard's world spun as he wondered what it was about. They saw a picture and read the headline but couldn't read the story. But the man with the paper read everything and got the provided phone number. He quickly called the number and waited for his reward. Eney had joined them and the three friends sat at a corner, wondering. While Richard was wondering what could be happening again, Elvis and Eney were perplexed at the realization that the homeless Richard was from a wealthy family. Eney dropped her plantain and moved closer beside Elvis, and they exchanged glances with each other and looked surprisingly at Richard. Elvis stared at him, shocked. You are that Richard?" Elvis asked, but Richard said nothing. He stood up and walked away with his heart pounding and mind racing, wondering how to run away and escape from the state to an unknown place. From across the street, Sergeant Effiong placed a call, knowing that the man that was reading the newspaper had already called the authority. "I think it's time." Within 10 minutes, a black SUV that pulled up at the mechanic village where Richard had taken a walk to, stunned everyone including his two friends who were quietly following him. Sergeant Effiong stepped out, saluted Richard, and said, "Your grandfather left a trail for you. It's time to come home now. I have been watching over you since the day that you were kicked out of the house. I am Sergeant Effiong, retired. Your grandfather paid me to watch over you before he died, and I have since been doing just that." "Grandpa is dead?" Richard almost screamed. "Unfortunately yes, Mr. Richard," Effiong confirmed, and Richard didn't speak. Richard looked at him and remembered vividly an occasion when he was attacked by hoodlums at night beside the stadium, and Sergeant Effiong, who happened to be passing by, scared them off. There was also an incident where his wrist watch was forcefully collected from him at night, only for him to wake up in the morning and found the same wrist watch beside him on the concrete where he slept that night. Richard recalled and understood everything. He simply nodded and looked at Elvis and Eney. "You're coming with me," he said. "Both of you are my family." He turned to Sergeant Effiong, "And you too, sir." At the gate of the Udofia mansion, servants bowed to him with the news everywhere, but what was even shocking to him was the fact that his grandfather had already been buried before the news got to him. He went and knelt by the headstone in front of the mansion and had a quiet, tearful moment with the grandfather. Reporters swarmed into the compound immediately and distracted his moment. A Sukwar stood in the doorway, stunned as Richard and friends walked in. Sergeant Effiong never left his side as requested by Richard. "Richard, listen, it was all a mistake," a Sukwar stammered. "Save your breath," Richard said, and directed his friends to wait in the large guest reception, while he went up to his grandpa's quarter upstairs. Eventually, evidence surfaced that the theft was staged. Surveillance footage mysteriously deleted, a statement forged by Udoak, and internal transfers routed to a ghost account tied to Friday. Even more damning was a phone recording. Effiong had once captured a Sukwar boasting of how Daniel's car brakes were handled properly. A Sukwar and Friday were arrested. Udoak fled to Ghana and was extradited 2 weeks later, and justice was not just served, it was televised. Richard stepped into the boardroom of Udofia Aluminium Group for the first time. Executives whispered in secret admiration of a young man who is trading on the footsteps of his late father, Daniel, with intelligence and charisma. Some sneered and some doubted. Loyalists of Friday and a Sukwar sabotaged and prayed for his failure, but he was well guided and he grew with wisdom and cleared the weeds from the fruitful plants of the company. The spirits of his father and his grandfather never stayed too far from him. The boy who once slept under a flyover and stadium, in the freezing coldness of the nights, now wore a fitted navy suit and confidence, sharper than a blade. Sergeant Effiong was given a permanent place in the company, and his presence was much more prominent. He introduced Elvis as head of outreach and provided him with guidance and tutorship to help him excel in the job. Richard embarked on a community development project. His first move was a landslide investment in street kid rehabilitation across Akwa Ibom State. When an elderly board member asked why, Richard smiled, because no child should be punished for the sins of the rich. And the sins of the rich to me also include negligence and greed. In the weeks that followed, Richard had found peace. He often visited his former sleeping spot under the Etarm flyover, recently rehabilitated to a beautiful park by his company. He and Eni shared quiet conversations, and he noticed her strength, her subtle grace that had been hidden in the shadows of poverty and struggles. One day, sitting by the stream near their old spot, she whispered, "You don't owe me anything, you know. We were just friends that were there for each other." "I owe you everything," he replied. "I never had a dime on me when I was kicked out of the house. You never got tired of helping me whenever I came to you. Always my last hope. You reminded me of my humanity." Richard said as their fingers brushed, and in that silence, something warm and promising blossomed. Eni became quiet and thoughtful for a while. She folded her hands across her knees while sitting on the rocky ground and looked thoughtfully at the stream water. Richard could sense what she was feeling at that moment because he felt it too. But he was being cautious, not wanting to give the impression of taking advantage of her. He picked up a small rock and threw it into the water, right where she had focused her stare, but she wasn't distracted because her mind was far from whatever she was looking at. After about half a minute, when Richard noticed that she was completely lost in thought, he summoned the courage and adjusted himself, then he held her and kissed her. Sergeant Effiong, who was watching from a distance, swallowed with relief as if he had long expected it. Eni looked deeply and lustfully into Richard's eyes. "Is this what you really want? Or you just feel like taking a chance?" she asked him, and Richard responded convincingly with a voice that was pregnant with emotion, "I have certainly always wanted this. But I needed you to be ready and willing." "I have always been ready and willing," Eni replied and held his head for a kiss, and they poured their heart into a warm, sweet, passionate kiss. 3 years later, Richard Udofia, at 22, was one of Nigeria's youngest CEOs, philanthropists, and reformers, but he remained simple. No flamboyance. Just purpose. Richard upheld his grandfather's legacy, but the entire family politics and witch hunting was purged from the family and the business empire. As an orphan, he professed a weak tie in the family and maintained a neutral status. He remained impartial and considerate to everyone. Richard diversified his wealth and gave so much back into the community, creating more jobs and employment. The Richard Ekong Foundation built schools, funded tech hubs, and fed thousands. At the inauguration of the Eni and Elvis Street Children's Shelter, he stood quietly, staring at the ribbon and thanking God within him that he was actually pushed into the street to meet his two friends. His hands trembled. "This is for my father and my grandfather. For the children sleeping on concrete tonight. This is for everyone who don't know when their next meal will come, or if it will ever come." He looked up at the sky. "For those who fell so that I could rise." And with a smile, he cut the ribbon, not as a billionaire's heir, but as a survivor who rewrote his story. The end. Please, subscribe to this channel for more interesting, beautiful stories. You can also share and drop your comment below. You may just want to tell us your high point of the story or tell us your opinion. Thanks and stay blessed. Stay tuned.